What are all these 80s films doing in Fortnite? Let's have a look. So, the tagline of this channel is the future of the past. And I used to play Fortnite with my son quite a lot. And one day, all these characters popped up in one of the intros to one of the seasons. And I thought, I know all of those characters, but do the kids playing Fortnite know these characters? And if so, why do they know them? And I came across that intro again recently when I was reliving some laser beam videos because he just amuses me quite a lot. He's a funny guy. And it got me to thinking. I thought, I wonder if I actually gathered enough of those characters to basically do this video. So the backdrops that you're seeing at the moment are me running around Fortnite as an alien, a predator, the Terminator, Robocop, all of these characters. And all of these films that these characters are from originally came out in the 1980s. Now some of you are screaming at me, yes, Alien came out in the 70s. I'm going to go with Aliens so I can sort of fit into my own box here. But essentially they are all very, very old characters. And I'm wondering, why are we still seeing these characters now? You know, are they really such sort of long-lasting characters that they've been ingrained into us and into the people who are developing games like Fortnite, so that they choose to keep them alive to try and keep the next generation interested in the things that they grew up with as children or teenagers themselves? And I think the answer to that, the latter, is yes, which is great for me and my channel because it means that that is the future of the past, because it's these types of characters being kept alive for future generations. These are 40-year-old characters, 40 years old now, and they are still generating new original content. And the interesting thing is, they were all original ideas when they were first made. None of them were actually derivative of existing things. Now, they've all had novels and so on done based upon them, yes, absolutely. But when they were created, they were all original concepts in and of themselves. So I thought it would be useful to just sort of, if you're unfamiliar, if you're watching this video because you like Fortnite but you don't know why I'm blathering on about Aliens and Predator and Terminator and Robocop, let me introduce you to them. So, Aliens is a favourite of mine. I love the concept, I love the execution of it. Marines in space fighting bugs. What's not to like? Aliens came out in 1986. It's a James Cameron film who has gone on to produce things like Avatar and The Abyss and numerous other science fiction / action classics that just have a little bit of thought behind them. 20th Century Fox film. At the time of production of this video, it's had a good 6 sequels that I can think of that are sort of either prequels or sequels. They're set in the same universe, basically. Let's say that. And I'm not including the Aliens vs Predator films because I'll come to those. But there are those as well. And it's got a TV series, Alien Earth, which is imminent at the time of recording. Aliens made $131 million when it was originally released in the 80s, so it's quite a big deal. It's now owned by Marvel. Yeah. Which makes me wonder whether or not the Fortnite appearance of Aliens, which is running behind here, with me running around as an alien, is actually based on the fact that Fortnite got the Marvel license, which included Aliens. It's possible, I'm not actually sure. And in terms of the future of the past, Aliens was set in 2179, which is 50 odd years after the original film Alien, which began that whole franchise. And this is what this is all about. This is about franchises, because the only way films keep running like this is because they have created themselves a franchise, either intentionally or by accident. In the 80s, I don't know that film franchises were really being consciously thought about. I think some happened by accident. So Superman is one that springs to my mind. James Bond is another one. You can switch out who's playing Bond, but he's still Bond. And that's an interesting aspect of these characters and how they're used. Now, I'll come to that later. So, that was Aliens, 86. Predator, 1987. Arnold Schwarzenegger, directed by John McTiernan. 15 rated, Aliens was an 18. Again, 20th Century Fox, so now owned by Marvel, who are using it in comics and have, it's now playing in Disney Plus, of course, because Disney owned Marvel. So it's quite funny, actually. I have put on my sort of crib sheet here, owned by Marvel, because it's owned by Disney / Marvel, but that's kind of where it is in my head canon. It's kind of Marvel. No TV series that I'm aware of, but it has had a recent anime. It's had, again, 6 sequels, inclusive of the anime and Prey. And, it's got another film imminently coming out. I think it's a film. Badlands, it's a film, isn't it? So, again, it was ironically set in 87, so not so much the future of the past, but the past of the past. But futuristic themes, although some might say that's been diluted a little bit of late. I don't think so. It's still science fiction. The Predator concept is quite high-end science fiction being used, clearly faster than light travel, cloaking devices, all that sort of good stuff. The Terminator, another James Cameron film. 1984, rated 15 when it came out, and special effects by Stan Winston. Now, this was released by Orion Pictures, and I had to do some research on this, and this I didn't know. Orion Pictures are now owned by Amazon MGM. So if you want to watch Terminator, you have to get an extra MGM subscription through Amazon, and then watch it on Amazon Prime, I think. Now, it may well turn up on TV still from time to time, but interestingly, it has its own sort of home with MGM. So I was like, all right, okay, that's interesting. Because I've got it on DVD, it's easy for me, but I'll come to that as well. It has had a TV show. It's had the Sarah Connor Chronicles, which I rather enjoyed. I think I've watched most of the episodes. And it had Summer Glau in it from Firefly, and Ulina Headley, the name is. So I think she wasn't an actress that I knew at the time, but she's been in Game of Thrones and so on since. So it might have been one of her early appearances. But again, in terms of its canonicity and the respect it showed to the Terminator canon, I think it did a rather nice job. Loads of Terminators in it, of all sorts of sizes and shapes and descriptions, and So if you like Terminator, go and check out the Sarah Connor Chronicles, because that's the only TV show there's been on it. Lots of films, of course, and again, we're looking at about 5 films by my reckoning, based upon the original Terminator franchise picture. It made 80 million. Predator made 100 million, incidentally. So all of these were quite, in 80s terms. I don't know whether Wikipedia converted for current values, but these are quite heavy hitters. These did very well in the 80s. And Terminator was set in 2029 and 1984, depending on which way you look at it, basically. But the future segments of Terminator were based in 2029. So again, still the future of the past, but only just. So Skynet, in theory, is kind of very, very imminent at this point. Robocop, again, Orion Pictures. So again, now, MGM. Now, this one's an interesting one because there's also a Marvel connection to Robocop, because Marvel did the comics at the time and a cartoon. But there have also been TV series. There has been Robocop Prime Directives, and then 2 animations on top of that. And all of these have had computer games. In fact, Robocop had one quite recently that I've downloaded but not played yet, which I believe is supposed to be very good. So, we only had 2 sequels for Robocop, and they sort of went, yeah. But we've also had a reboot of Robocop, which is interesting because of all of these franchises, Robocop's the only one that's gone down the out-and-out reboot route, or tried to. And of course that reboot hasn't spawned any more feature films since, but they did try. So it's 2 more films in the original series and a reboot. And it was the least successful of the films at the time of release. It was an 18. It got 50 million in the box office when it came out. So not as blazingly successful as the others, and it hasn't had as many sequels as the others. But in my own headcanon, and that for me is linked with comics quite a lot, Robocop is very much of that era, quite hard science fiction. It's not actually clear what year it was set in. Probably sort of mid-90s. It's not ever really sort of clearly stated, but it's near future at the time it was created. So it was a few years down the line, basically, was the setting for Robocop. So, interestingly, I found out when I was doing this research a few interesting things. Apparently, you pronounce the Predator's sort of name as a grouping as Yautja. I think is the correct spelling. It's Yautja. So if you hear that, if you see that written down as a reference, that's what the Predator aliens are called. An artist who did work on the film 2010, The Year We Make Contact, also did designs for aliens. That makes perfect sense in my headcanon, because I think the Leonov from 2010 looks very much like the Sulaco from Aliens, and it turns out the Leonov came first. Interesting to my mind, and that was Sid Mead. I think I haven't actually made a note of his name stupidly, but I'm pretty sure that was Sid Mead. Now, interesting concepts behind these films, because if you think about the titles of these films, Predator, Aliens, The Terminator, Robocop, none of them are focused on a human character that has to stay the same. Yeah? So Predator is generic, could be any number of predators, because that's just a catch-all for the concept, basically the alien hunting someone. So that's the core concept of the film. Aliens, again, any number of aliens, just, the threat is aliens. The Terminator could be disguised as anyone, it doesn't have to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, it can be anyone underneath, on top of the endoskeleton of a Terminator robot. So, could be anybody. Robocop has a very convenient mask, so you can't actually see much more than this bit. So, if you can only see that bit, basically any actor can play him. So, it's really fascinating to me. They're all quite not anonymous, but they are not distinctive in a way that you would think would make them appealing to people. So you can basically slot any human actors in as opponents or prey of those characters and generate a new film off the back of that. So there are relatively few recurring human characters in these films. I mean, Sigourney Weaver does best out of the Aliens films, because she's in the vast majority of them. Predator, though, you just chuck a new human in every time, or humans in every time, and you're away. That's easy. Robocop could be whoever's next made into a Robocop. again, easy, and then he goes after whichever criminals are the criminals of the day. And the Terminator can be whichever human you want him to look like, or it to look like. And I mean, Sarah Connor, of course, was always Linda Hamilton. But other than that, you could have a Terminator hunting down somebody else if the leader of the resistance, if you change the timeline, basically. So I just find it quite interesting because part of the franchise being that successful, and I am limiting these to science fiction based franchises from the 80s. You could go Ghostbusters and stuff easily as well. I know there are other examples from the 80s that have made it into the present day, still being kept alive, but I've kind of focused on the future of the past type ones. And if you can think of some other good examples, please do go for it. I mean, there's definitely some crossover here with Marvel Cinematic Universe, for example, but we never really had films based on that as a breadth of concept until much later. You could go Batman 1989, sure, but for me that's very much present day, albeit with cool gadgets. So it doesn't quite fit into what I'm looking at here. And yeah, Batman's been in Fortnite, Superman's been in Fortnite, loads of that tie-in, definitely. But Fortnite was more the sort of the genesis of the idea rather than what I'm looking at closely here. So what we're going to have a look at now is the other thing that for me has kept these films alive, and that is comics. And for me personally, the comics were quite a big deal because they really sort of opened my eyes and broadened my horizons to the idea of, oh right, so you can have comics about films then, can you? And then you can cross-mix films and comics in comics that deal with more than one character. Oh right, so Dark Horse comics for me growing up were quite a big deal because they really were sort of, oh wow, you can actually intelligently expand universes in comic book format before the films can actually get a chance to be produced that might do the same thing, which of course Aliens vs Predator subsequently did. But let's have a look at some comics and some of the merchandise that I've picked up, and then let's talk about sequels a little bit, but not in massive detail. So I've now taken you through the films, and here's just one of many examples of different versions of films I've picked up over time. I don't have all of them by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I don't have a single example of Robocop. Now, I think that's quite interesting in the sense that whilst I do know the film pretty well, obviously it's probably available on any streaming service going these days, and yet the fact that I don't have it is reflective of the fact that it was one of the ones that probably shocked me the most when I first saw it, because I fibbed a bit in order to watch it, and so it did leave quite a lasting impression because it was pretty nasty when I watched it at the age I watched it for the first time. So I've tended to collect the other more sort of gentle, for want of a better description, ones I think more so than Robocop, but I am going to get it on Blu-ray at some point, definitely. But I think one of the other reasons that I haven't got Robocop is that by the time I got around to the third film, I really felt that it had lost its direction. So I didn't really sort of keep with Robocop as I kept with the other universes that were actually far more active in many respects. So this is one example I've had for a little while, 2 disc special edition. It's only a DVD. Again, I'm not even sure I've actually got Predator on Blu-ray, strangely. But I mean, they've come out so many times, in so many different ways. So compilation disc here. So here you get Alien versus Predator, Aliens, and Predator. So it's not quite all the ones on my sort of primary list for this video, but you can see that others also put them together, which makes perfect sense to, doesn't it? Interestingly, it's rated 18, and I'm not interesting. The Predator disc was 18 in and of itself, because I can't quite remember now. I don't have my notes in front of me whether or not Aliens was
18 when it originally came out. I'm pretty sure Alien vs Predator wouldn't have been, because we kind of got used to it by that point. We got a nice original poster, I think, there being used as the cover for the Terminator DVD. I've always quite liked that one. That's probably the reason I picked it up, actually, because it very much reminds me of Arnie in the Terminator, and of course Arnie was in Predator. But the weird thing is that, as I've probably already mentioned, although he's a link between the Terminator and Predator, he doesn't appear in either Robocop or Aliens, so he doesn't link all 4 films, but he's one of those sort of loose links between them. Cameron is responsible for Terminator and Aliens, but again, he isn't responsible for Robocop or Predator. So again, there are lots of pairings within the 4 of people who were the same, but there isn't a link running through. There's no sort of golden thread linking them all. Then of course we get all shiny with the sequels there. Nice Terminator skull built in as the DVD case there. I've always quite liked that one. Now, I do have some time for Salvation, actually. I quite enjoy it as a sequel, but I don't want to get into individual discussions of the sequels. I'd be here virtually literally all night, because you're probably talking about 20 odd films altogether across all of the films I'm looking at as my 80s films here. So we'll not dwell too long on that one. And this one I only picked up relatively recently, because again I realised it was one I didn't have in my collection, which of course is Arnie's return in Terminator 2, which a lot of people rate incredibly highly as a really sort of seminal work of sort of action film. And I do kind of get it, because it did establish a lot of sort of special effects and so on techniques that we hadn't really seen before. But again, to my mind, it's just, yeah, okay, well, but we've, it's the same concept as the first film, basically, only with one more Terminator in it. So it's kind of, yeah, okay. But it is a great film. It is a great action flick of its time, and obviously it was nice to see Arnold reprising his role, and it did universe build as well. So I'm all for the sort of the time travel element. Now, what I'm really here to do is take you through a little bit more of the expanded universe that led to these 4 films becoming actual franchises. And I think for me personally, and forgive me if this is slightly chaotic, because I haven't done my best really in terms of organising this, because it's been a very, very busy week. But this is probably the best example I can give you of a comic that really it opened my eyes to a lot of possibilities, this comic. Because this is number 1 of Dark Horse Aliens vs Predator in the original American format. And when I picked this up originally, this would have been probably sort of early 90s for me. Dark Horse started producing comics based on Predator in '89. So just a couple of years after the film had come out, Dark Horse were already expanding the universe. Which is interesting, because that was pre the second film. So the first sequel to Predator wasn't actually a film, it was a comic in that sense. And they expanded it very, very cleverly, because the rules of the hunt are there, but this is an initiation hunt. So this is where the Predators kind of earn their stripes. And of course there has been a movie adaptation which has absolutely nothing to do with this comic, and yet you will see certain similarities between this comic and the film nevertheless. But this, for me, opened my eyes to the idea of crossovers, because really, up to that point, I'd read Transformers, which had a small crossover with Spider-Man and Gears in one of the very early episodes, but that was kind of it. And then maybe even sort of Death's Head and Doctor Who, actually, a little bit. But then I saw this in a comic store in York, and I just thought, what on earth is this? You're taking aliens and putting them together with Predator. That's crazy. That's crazy, because it was new. I'd never seen it before. And it did a brilliant job on both sides conceptually. So it's the classic thing of humans end up in the middle of a bug hunt. And as you can see here, they've discovered a face hugger. And it's infected one of these sort of, sort of cow analog beasties on this alien planet. And basically the Predator's messed up. So what the Predators was supposed to do was seed a planet with standard alien warrior eggs, about half a dozen, for initiates to go out and hunt. Unfortunately, the cunning alien queen on board the Predator ship pushes a queen egg into the collecting tray for the hunt. So a queen egg ends up going on the hunt, and of course that produces another queen, which of course produces more eggs, which produce more aliens. So what should be a small scale one-off alien infestation clear out by a group of young predators ends up being out and out war. And humans start getting infected and the various creatures start getting infected. But it was really, really cleverly done, and it did introduce the concept of humans actually sort of working with predators, because this one particular predator decides that the human is worthy of being sort of partnered with, and that human is then actually adopted into the predator tribe, not with huge success, but with some success. And the fact that she's allowed to survive at all is quite impressive. So you can see that, and the artwork was very much my sort of style. It was very nicely sort of line drawn. And the other interesting thing about it was as well, while I think about it, the predators were equipped with quite a limited range of weaponry. So they were required to fight the aliens kind of on a par. So they had bladed weapons, the aliens had their tails and so on. So they weren't allowed to go plasma casting off their shoulders like they would normally do, perhaps in other hunts. So they only had like single shot weapons as well. So they were quite limited, and that's why it was so sort of problematic. So and it wasn't just the Predator getting expanded universe stuff. I mean, obviously the aliens are present there, but the aliens were getting their own out and out storylines as well. Now, the artwork inside this one is not to my taste, but the covers are awesome. So we've got these really sort of Geiger-esque covers here. And again, these are massively expanding the universe of Aliens beyond the actual, obviously Aliens itself is an expansion of the Alien universe, but these comics keep it going. And, they're a damn sight cheaper to make than films. So it comes as no surprise to me that this is the way that it went. And again, there are a lot of Aliens crossovers, but they do have a lot of their own sort of standalone series as well. So we've got things like Aliens Apocalypse here. Which I haven't actually sat and read this yet. I've had it for a little while now, but I realised that I caught up on some of these in sort of collected comics, but others I have had sort of individual runs. So I just literally just haven't got around to catching up with them all yet. But the collected novels, the graphic novels of the Aliens, I would recommend to you, because they're really, really nice as well. So this was, Alien vs Predator. Got Alien vs Predator War. So again, that's a sort of collected series, which I think I've got in a graphic novel form somewhere. We've got Predator Cold War, which I think I caught in a collected comic way back, years back. But I'm not sure I ever read the whole thing. So I'm thinking I've got most of those now as well. So all of these were basically expanding this, the sort of the Predator universe at the same time. But not to be outdone or forgotten, we also had the Terminator. And of course, we also got introduced to other versions of the infiltration models as well over the course of this. So we've got lots of sort of Bisley-esque, in fact it probably is Bisley, doing the covers here. And again, this is one I haven't actually got up to date on yet. But all of these are Terminator series produced by Dark Horse Comics. Now, other publishers have dealt with Aliens and Predator over time. I think it's Dynamite Comics have done some as well. So, you know, other comics houses have taken them on, but Dark Horse are perhaps best known for having run with this particular this range. Now, I picked this up from Gareth just this week because it made me chuckle, because that's a classic crossover. I will look at crossovers separately, but Predator versus Judge Dredd versus Aliens, that just made me smile. I thought, yep, drock it. I mean, Judge Dredd's done quite a few crossovers. He's been with Batman and people like that before now as well, but that one just made me chuckle. So I will come back to sort of the crossovers as a sort of separate genre as well. And in fact, by the end of the video, we'll come full circle in some respects, because here we have another interesting one, which I knew existed. And Gareth just had a couple of issues of this in his back, his older comic section. This is Robocop, produced by Marvel Comics. And of course, the funny thing about this is that Robocop was made by Orion Pictures. Orion Pictures was bought by MGM. MGM is now part of Amazon. So although Marvel was doing the comics, and indeed the cartoon series, I believe, back in the day, ironically, it's ended up under the Amazon umbrella rather than the Marvel Cinematic Universe umbrella. And this also explains, and I realised sort of with sort of wry amusement after the time, that this also explains why, when you're looking for things like The Terminator on streaming services, they're often not all under the same roof. Because The Terminator is also MGM, whereas Aliens and Predator were 20th Century Fox, now Marvel, of course. But the Orion films have ended up with MGM. So as a result, you have to pay again on Amazon to see the MGM films like The Terminator, whereas others seem to be more readily available. So the more recent ones, I guess, probably weren't Orion and MGM originally. They were probably produced by a separate production company. So they've got slightly different distribution rights associated. But the really early ones have now gone to Amazon. And as I say, you have to pay extra for the MGM films, it seems. So it's a weird world we live in, and yet I have the DVD, so I can watch them whenever I want. I don't have to pay a subscription. Huzzah! Yes! There are advantages to having the real things. Now, as I say, I will look at crossovers again, of which there are many. I mean, Aliens versus Predator, I don't really see that as a crossover so much as they do appear, they are part of the same universe. So that is established canonically to be the case at this point, I feel. So, you know, I would say that they aren't really crossovers as such, they just happen to run into each other from time to time in the same universe. So I've had this book here for donkey's years. I don't know exactly when it came out originally, but it is one of those sort of quite sort of early comics featuring the Terminator, and here we see a different model of a Terminator, which is actually it's a different approach. It's not an endoskeleton with a human put on top of it. It's a human who's had cyborg components put into him. So he's actually quite human, and he actually is constantly in conflict with his cyborg side. So that's quite an interesting flip. He's not as combat capable as the other Terminators are, the Property 800s, but it's an interesting storyline because of that. And this is, you know, it's quite well done. The graphics are a little bit simple, but you know, it's, for me, again, this was not something I'd ever thought of in terms of, you know, films getting comic treatments, because I was quite new to comics, you know, in general in those days. So This one I've had in my collection for a very, very long time. So this is one of the early Aliens collected novels, which is Aliens Book 1. So this deals with, I'm trying to think what it does deal with actually. Yeah, it's got the engineer is in it, or an engineer is in it, but probably very different to how the films have treated them. And it's basically Hicks going after Newt. And I think it actually deviates from the, I think it follows on from Aliens rather than Alien 3. So it's that early basically. So it's interesting. It's also very black and white, as you can see here. Quite visceral, despite the fact that it's only black and white. But this was a Titan Books release, £6.95 back in the day. Still in good nick though. I'm just trying to see if I can find. It was first Titan edition, January 1990. So quite similar to Dark Horse, normal release times, because it probably was Dark Horse released originally. And here I've got a slightly more modern version of one, which is the Aliens Predator War, and this follows on directly from those Alien vs Predator comics that I was just showing you in single form. This is a follow-on from that. Different planet, same problem, basically. So, the comics gave the original 80s films a new lease of life on a very low budget, effectively, because they weren't films, very simply. But it expanded the universe. It brought Aliens and Predator together way before they appeared on screen together, of course, accepting the hint in Predator 2. But you could see that was the way, that was the direction of travel, basically. But I would like to think that the comics probably inspired the film to take that approach. I'm not quite sure who first came up with the idea, because they were both in the same studio. So from an IP point of view, that was pretty straightforward. So let's now have a look at some of the merchandise. Now, I don't actually have a huge range of Predator, Alien, Robocop, Terminator merchandise, but I've got some examples. In front of you here are two examples from Eaglemoss's range, and they're quite, as you can see, they're very, very different. On the one hand, we have a Cheyenne dropship from Aliens, and on the right hand side, we have a character that doesn't appear in any of the 80s films, but she's the lady from the Aliens vs Predator comics I showed you earlier. So I rather like her sculpt, actually. I think it's pretty cool. There's no articulation, so she's not she's a collectible rather than a toy in that sense. But I like that, but I do like the dropship even more. Doesn't seem to want to focus on it, but anyway, that's okay. So if you're looking for ship models, there are loads and loads of those, of course. Lots of plastic kits. I had a Halcyon alien back in the day with an egg. Which I think I used far too much glue. In fact, I had a dropship from Halcyon as well, and I believe you can still find those on occasion. Now, I wouldn't claim to be trying to get a collection together of these, but of course, they do have a certain attraction for me, inevitably. So what I have picked up of late, just really as sort of odds and ends, is of course somewhat inevitably, I suppose, the NECA figures. And again, there are way more than these available, of course. And these are relatively recent as compared with some of the really early Predator toys and the Aliens toys, indeed, that came out quite a while ago. In fact, this is one of those videos where I keep remembering stuff that I've got, and fortunately it happens to be to hand. But this, for example, is a sort of a kind of alien toy. So, again, it's kind of why are you selling this to kids? But again, this comes back to a theme that I'll return to again, that although these films started off as sort of mature, gritty adult films, over time they've morphed into something else. And indeed, the whole Fortnite connection here that started me down this path is typified by stuff like this. It's, this is the grown-up adult toy for people who want something that's exactly the same as it was in the film, because he's great. I really love that as a mold. This is the you know, the toyified version where they just randomly create any sort of alien they can think of because they can. So it's just different strokes for different folks, basically. I remember chuckling to myself when an alien chest burster came out of somebody's chest in the middle of Ready Player One, the film version, and my son just sort of laughed at it, and I just thought, back in the day that would have been really freaky, but now it's just part of pop culture, so it doesn't have quite the same impact as it did when it first happened, which is inevitable. That's how things move on, isn't it? You know. So that's a somewhat incomplete Predator by NECA, but as I say, I do think it's a really, really great figure of a Predator. There are many, you know, different lines that carry Predators, of course, and you can probably pay about as much as you want to for a figure like that at various different scales. And of course, NECA have also done this chap. I'll just show you the box briefly first, because I do have a box for this one, and it's a very nice, typical sort of NECA box. This is the Ultimate Edition, apparently. I think probably just because it comes with a few accessories. But, you know, the artwork on that's great. It just screams, so to speak, aliens at me. And it is the alien from Aliens rather than the original Alien. So he doesn't have the smooth forehead. He's got the ridged head. But as you can see, you know, lots of posability with it. It's got a face hugger. It's got an egg. I think I'm missing the actual the sort of chestburster snake version of the alien from the pack, but I've got pretty much everything else from it, I think. And it opens up, and again you've got a nice image on the inside sleeve there. So it's a nice piece of artwork. It's a nice box to have that one, even if the actual figure isn't quite complete. And the nice thing about the NECA figures is they do scale with one another. So, you know, if you wanted to put this up with the Predator, you wouldn't have any difficulty doing it. Now this guy is quite difficult to pose, as I recall, because for some reason his feet don't actually have ankles, which is a little bit of a drawback. So I might just have to hold him there. But as you can see, you know, he's quite an effective mould as well. His jaw's very, very elongated. I'm not sure if I can. Oh yeah, he does close up actually. So again, you know, the head sculpt on that is very, very nice. And you know, if you can find a couple loose, then you could build up a reasonable sort of army of these guys. Another one that I've got, which I haven't brought down, is a big Lanard one, which is kind of weird purple alien queen. And in fact, they did a few others in various colours as well. So again, you know, we've got the egg there that comes in that set. So loads of aliens, loads of Predators. Pays your money, takes your choice. You can go back in time with them, or you can get the nice, you know, NECA boxes, which would be pleasant. This is quite an early NECA that I picked up randomly. Now I think I was in Wrexham actually for this one. So as you can see, this is a very, very tilty over Terminator. Stay there. Okay, I'll keep a finger on him. So this is a T800 endoskeleton, as you can see, which I haven't actually ever unboxed, not for any particular reason. And I am kind of thinking around doing a little display with some of these off the back of doing this video, of course. But again, he's a nice example. He's got his sort of, is it a plasma weapon? But he's got his rifle as well, which is great. But he's just a very, very well done example of, you know. I mean, obviously nothing, and this again comes back to another sort of interesting thing around the Terminators. They don't necessarily have to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. You know, they can look like whoever you want them to when you're Skynet, because Skynet can just do whatever. So between him and Predator and Robocop and Aliens, you don't actually need fixed human actors at all. You can just mix and match. So, you know, the only characters that actually remain the same across the series are the aliens and the robots. You know, who can look like anybody they want to, because Robocop obviously is largely obscured. And here he is it's still in his box actually, because I've still not got him out of his box. But I did want to pick him up because, again, I was thinking towards doing a grouping with these guys. So I have him as a boxed recent NECA example, and again, really nice. More innards here probably than I have of the Aliens box actually. But he's got a nice insert card on the inside cover there, and again, loads and loads of accessories present here. So this is obviously, this is the fully armoured version of Murphy. I have seen that there's a version of Murphy which is just Murphy in cop gear as well. So it's a really nice thing to have that sort of in full. And of course, all of these appear in this style in Fortnite. And again, the reason is because they don't have to get likeness rights to do it, other than for these characters. They don't need the actors' permission to do it because they don't look like the actors. Now, Sarah Connor and Ripley, of course, are exceptions to that rule. I'm not quite sure how they swung that. Maybe it's because they're just digital representations, so they're not using actual footage of actual people. So they may well, that's perhaps easier for them to get away with, I guess. But once they got that license, Fortnite clearly decided that, yep, we're just going to go for this now. So it did occur to me that actually the thought process there was actually, given that they've got the Marvel rights, or had the Marvel rights at various points for the superheroes, presumably they then picked up the 20th Century Fox rights from Marvel in order to be able to do Predator and Aliens. But I've no idea how they came to do Robocop and Terminator. But obviously at some point they did a licensing deal for those as well. Never seen Stargate in there though. Stargate would be another one, but that's 90s rather than 80s, so not quite sure where they sat with that. Now, if you want some dafter examples of merchandise, and obviously you can get little guys like this as well, of course. And they're teeny tiny, but they tickle me. They amuse me. I keep forgetting who did. I think. Now, who do these? I always forget this. Oh, these are Titans. So these are Titans. These guys here. Happily, I've got. In fact, they're Funko. That's right. Yes, they're actually released by Funko, but I think they're also called Titans. 2014, that one was released in. But the other one is 2018, Aliens Fox. So actually, they may come from two different lines, even though size-wise they look very, very similar. They may possibly come from different lines. They're certainly released in very different years, apparently. So I just randomly picked those up as well over time. So it might be a good time. And I don't have any examples of them, but whilst I'm showing you this as well, this is a good segue actually. There are also, of course, loads and loads of games in the franchise for both of these guys. Now, this is one I think I picked up from Gareth a little while ago as well. But this is Alien and Predator Deluxe box set. This is a McFarlane Toys version of Predator and Alien. So again, McFarlane getting in on the act as well as NECA and everyone else. There must be so many licenses out there for these guys. It's just not true. But my point here is that this is a crossover. So again, this is the universes meeting in merchandise form, but it's not the only place that it happens, of course. We know there are Alien vs Predator films. We've seen that happen, and it probably won't be the last time that it happens either. But it is a segue for me to now look at some of the other slightly more random crossovers that we've seen, particularly in comic form. This one I might do a separate video on this one at some point, because again, I've yet to get it out of the blinking box, so I need to do that and have a really good look at it. But again, the artwork on this is terrific. So that side view there, I really like. I think that's a great picture of this model, and there are various other things being advertised on the back there as well. But I like the box art. I like the box art a lot. I think it's very sort of striking. It's a little bit faded, but it's you can still see it there. It's undoubtedly a massive rabbit hole if you did get into it. in terms of the available merchandise associated with these and the figures and everything else. But it's not. For me, I've always found the comics more interesting in this line, I think, because it's science fiction setting, and it's just interesting because they can do whatever they want with it. It's really interesting to me like that. So let's go crossovers now. So the great thing about characters like Predator, Alien, Terminator even, it's very, very easy to do crossovers with them because they're quite generic. It could be any given Predator, it could be any given alien, or lots of aliens, or just an alien. You don't really have to worry about it. They are eminently disposable. So you can team them up with pretty much anyone going, and then the Predators will never be seen again. The aliens will never be seen again thereafter, So here we have Batman versus Predator. I love this. When I got this, I thought this was superb, because it's a great example of Batman adapting to a new threat and sort of understanding his way out of it, to an extent. And again, he's kind of reliant on his wits to survive the initial encounter. And he's investigating a series of murders by the Predator, of course, because the Predator is on the hunt. But the Predator ends up targeting Batman. As, of course, one of the most skilled hunters himself in Gotham, he attracts the Predator's attention. The artwork in it is terrific. And it really sort of stuck in my mind. It also looks like the 60s, 70s kind of incarnation of Batman, the way it's drawn as well, which also drew it to me, because I've always loved that. I don't know quite why, because it's not really massively my era of Batman. But I just really liked the way it was, the artwork was done on it, basically. I also like the way that the Predator has his voice done, because he's always quoting things that we've seen people say around him, which is exactly what he's supposed to do per the film. So I appreciated that as a concept. The Predators never just start speaking. And it's handled slightly differently amongst different comics. But for example, the human who ended up with them often sort of interprets body language more than actual language as such. So we've had Batman and Predator, we've had Superman and aliens. Now, this of course makes absolutely zero sense whatsoever, but basically Superman is largely depowered during the course of this story, so it's not as one-sided as you might think it would be. And the alien's blood can actually hurt him because he's somewhat depowered. Now, this really sort of made me chuckle. I'm just finding even more comics that I'd forgotten I'd fished out that I haven't actually shown you. This isn't a crossover one, but I just want to show you the cover, because the cover always makes me smile. Again, it's quite reminiscent of some of the scenes in Fortnite I've created recently, because this is an alien toting a weapon, but it's not actually an alien, it's actually a robot dressed up as an alien in order to mingle with the aliens, so it sort of secretes their pheromones and so on, so it doesn't get clobbered. And generally speaking, they tend to ignore droids as well, because they're not capable of housing offspring, so there's no point. So yeah, that one just amuses me. It's a great comic, actually. It's a great graphic novel, that one. This one made me laugh, because until I actually started thinking about this, I'd completely forgotten that aliens have a critical part to play in this Stormwatch story from Wildstorm comics. Now, some of these characters have now been brought into the DC universe, of course, but here aliens are a major plot point, because they infest the orbital satellites controlled by Stormwatch. It is Stormwatch the team. I'm just thinking that these are the Wildcats who come and try and help. But basically, they actually wipe out a big chunk of Stormwatch. So they actually have major sort of world-shaping implications. But again, they're used as a disposable tool in the midst of this storyline, with no sort of greater explanation as to how they appear, other than the fact that obviously they find an alien, and then literally all hell breaks loose off the back of it. So But it was one of those examples where I thought I'd completely forgotten that that was a thing, but I had another graphic novel sat on my shelf that involved aliens that isn't sort of expressly aliens. I mean, you can see one on the cover, but they don't get any billing on the front at all, and yet they're absolutely critical to the storyline. So again, that just made me chuckle. The thing that really makes me chuckle though is that we now come back in a weird way full circle, because just recently Gareth's been mentioning this title as being one that people have been picking up, and this is today: Predator versus Spider-Man. So this is Marvel doing Predator, and Marvel were doing Robocop back in the sort of, the early 90s. So I was like, that's bizarre. So now they've got Predator, because of course they bought 20th Century Fox, and you can see 20th Century Studios up here top left. So now they can combine Predator with Spider-Man, and I've read this comic and it's quite nasty. This is not Spider-Man as I remember him from the 80s. This is a much more mature, pretty graphic comic. So I don't know if this is like a sort of I mean, it says in association with Marvel. And it has this does have a parental advisory notice on it. So I guess that maybe this is a sort of slightly unusual imprint, because I'm not as up to speed on my comics as I have been for a while. It's almost got some Gotham-esque touches there. There's quite sort of gargoyle-y imagery there as well, almost like it was a Batman crossover. But again, this is current, and this is where it's come full circle. This is a franchise from the 80s reappearing in comic form in the mid-2020s. So you've got to hand it to them. They knew how to make them back in the 80s for these characters to still be completely active and completely, involved in modern pop culture. Just as they pop up in Fortnite, they are now still popping up in comics, because that industry has never really sort of, it's tended to contract in terms of the number of studios and houses producing comics. So of course a lot of these IPs are now coming under single roofs, because there aren't that many roofs left at the end of the day. I'm not actually sure how long this series is, but that's issue 2, which I haven't got to yet, and issue 3, and issue 4. So clearly Kraven the Hunter is sort of front and centre in here, but and then there's going to be more than one Predator as well, clearly, because it looks like a hunting party rather than just a single one. But the one that I have been introduced to thus far seems to be a little bit wacky as Predators go, is my feeling on the subject. So that, to my mind, is sort of part of the future. Clearly, a lot of these are going to have ended up in the same place. So let's discuss the future now.
So that was just a very, very quick gallop through some of the stuff that I've got, and obviously there's loads more merchandise, lots of games I haven't even tried to look at here. But you saw there some examples of crossovers, and obviously things that are sort of more based on sequels. And I want to take up the sequels idea next, because why have so many sequels of these films been produced? Sort of, we're not exactly into double figures, but when you think about games expanding storylines as well as the actual feature films and the sequels, why do we keep coming back to these concepts? And I'll remind you something that I said in the sort of introductory section, which is it's very easy to substitute new characters in when your protagonists aren't human. And I think that's what it boils down to, is that people like watching other people in jeopardy. Predators hunt people. Aliens hunt people. The Terminator hunts people. Robocop does not hunt people unless they're bad people. But Robocop still kills people. Just saying. So there is that common theme running through, is that there are clear villains, depending on your point of view, and you're often cheering for the humans. Now, I think that Robocop is the odd one out, and it has the fewest sequels. And do you know why that is? Because I think they took Robocop the wrong way. Robocop was inherently more limited because he's just a policeman at the end of the day. He doesn't have the outer space or time travel element that the others have in their favour for being science fiction. So he can't do a full-on reboot of the same character, which is why I think they went a different route with a reboot. But he's fundamentally rooted in human morals, and he is a cop. And I think that is why they did cartoons of him. That's why Marvel did a comic of him. They didn't go down a dark route with Robocop, even though the first film was screamingly dark. The subsequent films got lighter and lighter, and Robocop 3 is just like, what the heck? You know, it was. I think it. You know, it got watered down so much that it lost itself. So, although I've included it in this video, and I like the fact that it's the original Robocop in Fortnite, and it's quite good fun running around at high speed with him because he wasn't that fast in the show, or in the films. I just think that we get these sequels because they are easy concepts to reproduce. We're familiar with who the baddies are. They can do variations on the baddie and how the humans interact with the baddie, but what we're actually rooting for almost is the Predators and the aliens and the Terminator, because we know that they're going to drive the action, and they are replaceable. You can use whoever you want for them, so it's easily done. And obviously it's even more so now, because obviously, you know, we've seen a CGI Arnold now, Terminator Salvation. I quite like it as a Terminator film, but obviously, you know, it didn't need Arnold Schwarzenegger to turn up and do it, because they could just reproduce him. So we're in a very different era now, where, you know, people like familiarity, I think. But my question is, I suppose, with the sequels, are they enough to pull new viewers in ultimately? You know, because people like me are not going to last forever. I will cark it at some point, unfortunately. And then where are you? Because, you know, are you relying on people like me showing these films to their kids and getting them involved? There's so much content out there now. I honestly don't know whether or not sequels to these original films are going to be enough to keep these franchises running in isolation. Now, the comics might help, because the comics are definitely still going, but, you know, the sequels themselves are probably going to start to struggle, because they're going to be recycling ideas inevitably, and it just remains to be seen. You know, obviously there's a lot of flack thrown at the various Star Wars series spin-offs that we're seeing. Some hit the mark, some don't, and arguably the ones that hit the mark are the ones that are aimed at the older audiences, that are respectful to the original franchise. And we are a finite resource. We've got the money to pay for subscriptions, sure, in theory at least, but we are a finite resource ultimately. So, you know, it's interesting to me that Predator, Aliens and Terminator are the ones that are doing best, and Robocop seems to be sort of falling away a little bit now, because maybe there's just not enough there to run sequels on, you know, because it's been done basically as a concept. So, and lots of other different shows are now using a lot of very familiar concepts to me from this sort of era, and we're just seeing better and better versions of them, but the volume is such that I think we're kind of getting swamped. So nothing is rising to the top of the pile, because the pile is huge. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that in the comments, because, you know, obviously it's an obvious thing to say, I suppose, but that's my view, is that half the time I've no idea what I'm supposed to be watching, because, you know, I will inevitably veer towards the stuff that I know. If I see a Star Trek sequel, I'll try a Star Trek sequel, because I understand how that universe works. It has emotional resonance for me, because I grew up with the stuff. Kids of this age, my son, doesn't care. Doesn't give a stuff. Do you want to watch Star Trek, son? No, Dad. What do you want to watch? I want to watch The Flash. And it's like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So I get that. You know, he wants to watch the modern stuff. and it's faster. It's it's more his pace, what he's used to. But I'm gladdened when I see him actually sitting and watching a series, even if he's got his phone in front of him when he's watching it, mind. And I sort of say to him, "There's subtitles there. Did you see that?" "No." Or maybe you want to rewind and put your phone down and actually watch the screen, your big screen. And it's just fascinating to see the way in which he consumes things. It's very different. He's almost consuming the audio more than he is the visuals because he's on his phone at the same time. It's weird, but anyway. So crossovers. I looked at crossovers a little bit in the comics section, of course, but crossovers is interesting to me because again, it's a way of cross-pollinating franchises and introducing people who wouldn't be reading or be knowledgeable about the originating franchise that they've come to watch or read, and they're being introduced to another one. That to my mind is clever, especially if they don't clang. And of course, Aliens and Predator, match made in heaven to my mind. First time I read Aliens vs Predator comic, I was like, that makes complete sense. And of course they could do that because they were both 20th Century Fox when they were created. So it was dead easy for them. 20th Century Fox, instant crossover, not a problem at all, let's go with it. Excellent. Terminator and Robocop were both Orion Pictures. So in theory they could have crossed over. And obviously it wouldn't quite have worked, but they did it in the comics, and apparently there is fan lore that says that that Robocop was actually a precursor to the Terminators. So like the Terminator was sort of based off the design of Robocop. Although interestingly, and this is a little sideline for me, is Robocop a cyborg? Because apparently Murphy was declared dead. So is he just a robot with some human bits? Or is that not the case because he's still got enough of his original sort of organic brain left that he is actually a human augmented by robotics? But then a Terminator is clearly a robot with human bits added on. So does that make it a cyborg? Or is it just an android? So it's a robot in human form? Question. Everyone calls them cyborgs. But I'm not entirely sure because there's no core humanity there to run a cyborg off. To my mind, cyborgs are normally humans that have been augmented rather than being robots that look like humans. They're androids, to my mind anyway. So, again, interested to hear your comments. Now, the crossovers is easy for Predators and Aliens. Aliens impregnate humans, and so on. Dead easy. Predators can hunt anybody, plug them into the storyline, off you go. You got a Predator in the storyline, easy peasy. I've shown you Spider-Man and Predator, Superman and Aliens, Batman versus Predator. There's all sorts you can do with that. So because they are generic, again, in a sense, people understand the principle of them, but they don't have to be the same one each time, so you can keep throwing them at different people and people don't have a problem with that. So really super useful kind of generic everyday threat factor, basically, for anything going. And probably partly why they threw them into Fortnite, because they figured that, it would be fun to run around as a predator and scare people and stuff, Might have done that. So finally, what I want to talk about is the future of these franchises that are now 40 years old. Excuse me. So here we are in the future. Where are Aliens, Predator, Terminator, Robocop in the future? So here's my theory. I actually think that the only series that are going to continue in a strong fashion are the Disney ones, which I keep calling Marvel, but Disney Marvel, call them what you will. I think only Aliens and Predator are actually going to keep going in a meaningful sense. And I think it's because Terminator it's been overtaken by everything else that does cyborgs and similar. And it's had a very fractured ownership history as well. So it's been auctioned off. The last two sequels did not do very strongly at the box office. It might continue in games, sure. You could keep doing games and sort of take the franchise kind of that way. But I don't think that as an out and out film experience, it's that strong anymore. Because the original actors and actresses inevitably will pass away. And yes, you could CGI them, but what would really be the point if the story's already been told that many times? There has to come a point when franchises just stop, I guess. I mean, they've done a remarkable job keeping all of them going this long, but there has to come a point, presumably, when it's just too much. So, I'm not sure that Terminator will keep going. I think that Robocop is effectively already dead, is my feeling. It had its day, it had the TV series done, it had the reboot film. It didn't really reignite anything, to my way of thinking. And modern effects mean that it's really easy for people to create cops that are also robots. And, it's just too easy now. And Robocop will only carry that sort of brand value if it looks like the original Robocop, I think. Now, I think that I have read somewhere that they might try another reboot, probably with the original looking Robocop, which would be great. But I just don't see the longevity in a world where we are sort of, awash with very, very similar media output. It's just the way of it. And I don't think that Robocop has got that sort of big backing behind it to really, really push it. Maybe we'll get a TV series again, I don't know. But my feeling is that Robocop in and of itself won't do that strongly going forward, and it was the weakest of the franchises that I've been talking about. So, good old Mickey Mouse, God bless his soul, nearly 100 years old himself, of course, so an excellent example of a franchise that has really stood the test of time. He's got Aliens, he's got Predators, they're doing new TV series, they're doing new films still of Predators. And again, now the special effects can really help them to do that as well. So we don't need to worry about guys running around in alien suits anymore, we just CGI them, dead easy, so relatively speaking. And you can trade them off against each other as well. And it's all yours, you own it all. So for Disney, that's really straightforward. And you can just keep going ad infinitum if you so choose. That is the way that I would see it going, is that Aliens and Predator is such an established franchise. And one of the things that sort of, I'll lose the glasses now. One of the things I actually thought about when I was thinking about this final future section was that they've become such a part of pop culture now that, teenagers are quite accepting of them just kind of randomly turning up and being referenced elsewhere. So Ready Player One, we had an alien chest burster and it was like, yeah, whatever. So I think it's quite possible that they will simply start being blended in with other things and they'll get toned down. And see, I think that's what it did for Robocop. Robocop got toned down so far that he stopped being Robocop as he originally was, so he lost the adult audience. And that, I think, was a fatal mistake in the way that Robocop was handled. But Aliens and Predator have never quite gone in that direction. Even though they're Disney are actually treating them quite respectfully in the sense that, they're not being softened, it seems, at the minute. I don't know about the new films, obviously, but I'm hoping that they will keep the tonality that they've always had, which is the more mature audience. I think they have to have that, is my personal opinion. And it was telling, I think, that Spider-Man versus Predator comic I showed you was for mature audiences. They weren't actually pulling their punches with that one, which is an impressive direction to take, especially with Spider-Man as well. To actually put Spider-Man in with more mature content, I thought was quite interesting. But again, your mileage might vary, obviously. So I think that Robocop cycle is an example of what not to do with these franchises if you want them to continue long term. Whether or not we might see more parody of these guys, quite possibly. I mean, Aliens has been parodied since Spaceballs. Even Spaceballs was doing a parody of Alien way back then. Alien wasn't that old at that point, but it's quite possible that we will keep seeing that recurring as a concept as well. So I don't think they're ever going to completely fade away. There's always going to be a place in our hearts for them. But this is a very different generation that's starting to come through now. It's only oldies like me, possibly like yourselves, given this channel's demographics, that are actually going to still want to see Aliens and Predator content going forward. And I'm fine with that, because it means that I get to keep seeing stuff that I enjoy, that I understand, that isn't trying to throw lots of new characters at me all the time that I have to try and get used to, only to see them vanish after one season because it wasn't successful enough and streaming's moved on to something else. You know, yeah, I'm old-fashioned. I'm used to having only a few big name franchises at any given point in time that are active. It's too many for me to keep track of now. I'm too old. So let's just calm down. Let's keep doing Aliens. Let's keep doing Predator. Let's keep world building there. You know, let's see what other goofiness Wellington-Yutani got up to. You know, let's do all of that. But let's keep trying to do it in sort of inventive ways and in ways that don't break what we already know about these characters as well, because I think that's quite important. There's the most recent Predator output I saw, I was a bit sort of, would they really do that? Would they go around collecting people who had been victorious against Predators and keep them on ice? It doesn't seem very honourable. It doesn't really seem the way that they operate. So I thought that was a bit odd, personally. But, you know, that's, again, obviously that's just my point of view. So I'm hoping this is, you know, the sort of the Fortnite angle here is introduced to you, perhaps if you're younger, to some concepts here you might not have been familiar with. If you're older, I hope it's been moderately entertaining for you. I apologise for the length, but this is one I've been wanting to get out of my system for a while, and I've tried out a few new concepts as I've been doing it to see if they work. So it's a bit of a test bed for me. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm sure there could be many views on this subject, and I look forward to hearing them. Please do like and subscribe to the channel if you would care to. Thank you very much. Goodbye.